I think there are grounds for optimism this year. The Trump ascendancy is certainly galvanising people on the centre-right. I think there are a lot of lessons here for Australia when it comes to energy, defence, and particularly when it comes to diversifying our trade away from communist China.
2025 is a year of change. Cultural and political disruption is transforming our nation and the global order. The rebellion against the establishment has accelerated. Australia and the Western Alliance is now at a crossroads. Either the mainstream will continue its ascendancy or the elites will prevail. Hello Tony, and g'day to all of our listeners. Great to be back for the first episode of 2025. We will be talking about the upcoming federal election, the Trump presidency, and anti-Semitism in Australia. Tony, great to be back with you. Happy New Year.
And to you, Dan. And I think there are grounds for optimism this year. I think that the Trump ascendancy is certainly galvanising people on the centre-right, right across the Anglosphere. And I think the fact that there is a real chance of a change of government here is also pretty exciting. I think we really need a change of government because while I've got a degree of personal regard for Anthony Albanese, I think this is the worst government we've ever had. I think that in so many areas this government is leading us on a ruinous path, particularly when it comes to energy. But I think this government is a classic example of the way Green left governments across the West have led us to a position of military, economic and cultural disarmament. And given all the other challenges in the world right now, that must end. So, as I said, the Trump ascendancy, I think, has been galvanic, and the potential for a change of government here should really motivate everyone who regards himself or herself as a philosophical liberal or a philosophical conservative, because we've got to reclaim our country, reclaim our culture, and ultimately reclaim our world.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's build on that with the upcoming election. Probably only 2 months away, maybe 3 months away. We'll see when it's going to be called. It does look like it's shaping up to be, at the moment, perhaps a Labor minority government, but there's still a long way to go. In terms of the issues that are dominating the debate and shaping it, it seems to be energy, as you mentioned, cost of living and immigration, to me are the three big issues out there. How do you see this playing out in terms of the big issues on voters' minds as they start to turn their mind to the election?
Look, the conventional wisdom, based on an analysis of current polls, is that there is most likely to be a Labor-Green minority government. I think that would be a disastrous result. And B, I think that the conventional wisdom is likely to be misplaced here. The longer the Albanese government lasts, the worse it gets. I think the Prime Minister will be tempted to hang on in the hope that something will turn up. But the only answer this government has to any issue is to spend more, regulate more, and invariably the spending is counterproductive and the regulation makes a bad situation worse. So I think this is a government in all sorts of trouble, and increasingly I think that on the key issues, Peter Dutton has a message of hope. I mean, take energy. Now, I think it was very strong of him to propose an immediate end to the nuclear ban. Sure, nuclear is not going to come to our rescue anytime in the next 5 to 10 years, but as well, the opposition is making a lot of encouraging noises about gas, and frankly, we do need 24/7 reliable power, and frankly, the Donald Trump drill baby drill mantra is something that could well be adopted here in this country. We have massive untapped reserves of gas in Beetaloo, in Narrabri, off the coast of the Northern Territory in Western Australia. Frankly, the first thing an incoming coalition government should do is declare an energy emergency, as Donald Trump has just done, and get these gas fields developed as quickly as is humanly possible. The environmental studies have all been done. It's only green lawfare which is holding these back. I hope that the opposition will seek an explicit popular mandate to develop these new fields at breakneck speed, because let's face it, we need the gas, the world needs the gas, and if we do have to reduce emissions, gas has about half the emissions of coal. So it's going to be good for us, good for the world, and frankly, to the extent that emissions really matter, it's going to be good for emissions as well.
You mentioned the Paris, you mentioned Trump and also his energy policy, and he said, well, they're out of the Paris Climate Agreement. He signed the executive order saying we're out. Isn't it time we got out as well?
Well, all along, I've said that I'm more than happy to see emissions reduce, and at some point in the future, yes, let's get to net zero. But what we should never do is get to net zero in ways which cost jobs, damage families' cost of living, and drive industries offshore. If we could just go back to some of the other things. Now, I agree with you, as well as energy, which feeds into cost of living, the other key issues I think are going to be immigration, because again, immigration at current rates, it depresses wages, it increases housing costs, it clogs infrastructure. I think immigration is going to be very important. There's the added element, just at the moment, we're particularly conscious of the fact that there are some poorly integrated immigrant communities that seem to be contributing to the massive wave of anti-Semitism sweeping across our country. And I think the public want immigration brought back under control. Legal immigration into this country has been out of control for the last couple of years since the pandemic. I think the public want it brought back very, very, very significantly. And I think Peter Dutton is already talking about that. He's been on the record now for months about the need for at least a 25% cut in immigration. So I think that's important. The other big issue is housing, and the fact that so many younger people feel locked out of the housing market. Even with the bank of mum and dad, so many young people feel it's almost impossible to get their foot in the housing door. And by giving people under 40 access to their superannuation, their compulsory superannuation, which let's face it, is their money, not the government's money, not the union super funds money. By giving people access to that money, they at least give them a realistic chance of getting a deposit. And sure, to all the people who say, but superannuation is for your retirement, the best guarantee of a good life in retirement is owning your own home. If you get to 65 or 70 and you're renting, you're in diabolical trouble. If you get to 65 or 70 and you've got a home of your own that's paid off, well, you're going to have an okay retirement. Yeah. So on energy, on immigration, on housing, I think there's already a lot that Peter Dutton can point to that says that our country, our lives, will be different and better if there is a change of government. Now, I do think that to beat a first-term government, it's not enough just to play it safe. It's not enough simply to criticise the government, even one as manifestly failing as this one. You do have to be able to offer a positive agenda of your own, and I think we've already got some pretty strong elements of a good positive agenda from Peter Dutton already.
Just on super for housing, I think one of the potential drawbacks of it is in the absence of extra supply of housing on the market, it'll just bid up the prices. So if you take 40 grand out of your super, you've got 40 grand more to spend at an auction. So the price goes up by 40 grand. So you're still bidding up the price. It's just more's getting transferred from one to the other. So we need some supply action, particularly on the urban growth, not just these high density apartments that people don't want, but urban growth that's properly planned for.
Look, I hear you. On the other hand, it does, if you like, change the equation for individuals. And it advantages first home buyers vis-a-vis everyone else, people buying subsequent homes or people who are looking at rental properties and so on. So yes, I take your point about bidding up the price, but I also think it's important to remember that we do need to give this important segment of the market a leg up, which is what it will do, but indeed we also do need to find ways of encouraging state and local government to ease the restrictions on what you can do with your land. I mean, we need more land released. We need to reduce the taxes on development. We need to reduce some of the green tape, which is making development so difficult at the moment. I mean, why is it that there has to be so many restrictive new rules on exactly what energy efficiency might be, or water retention might be, or so on? The important thing is to get our people housed. And when you've got 500,000 people coming in every year, you've got to be building at least 200,000 dwellings. And at the moment, we're scarcely doing half that.
One of the things I've noticed with the campaign on the coalition side, and I'm interested to get your views on this, is I think there's a bit of a risk in sort of they've got the teal seats that they want to win back, but the reality is if they want to form government, they've got to win Labor seats. They've got to win outer suburban Labor seats, no matter what. Well, they win 5 teal seats. They still need half. They still need a dozen plus Labor seats. So, is there a risk that they're maybe diluting their policies and their messages and trying to win the relatively affluent inner city teal seats and the not so affluent outer suburban Labor seats? How would you, I guess, go about that in terms of trying to square that, or do you just sort of focus on one and not the other?
Well, a couple of points. First of all, politics is a contest, and if you don't create a contest, you're never going to win. If it's pink versus a paler shade of pink, people will tend to go for the real thing rather than the imitation. Second point I want to make is that I think the Teals were very much a 2022 phenomenon. We had a 3-term coalition government that even its strongest supporters felt could have done so much better. We had the revolving door prime ministership. We had a period under Malcolm Turnbull when the government seemed to be more centre-left than centre-right. I don't think the government handled the pandemic particularly well. I'm not saying other governments were that good, but particularly for people on the centre-right, a government which spent and spent and spent and controlled and controlled and controlled in unprecedented ways was pretty dismaying. So I think there were a lot of instinctive centre-right voters who in 2022 wanted to cast a protest, and the Teals, who were pitching themselves as nicer kinds of liberals, were at that time a convenient place to lodge a protest. Two things. First, the Teals have now been revealed as much more green than they are liberal. I mean, they've been voting with the Greens 80% plus of the time. And second, at this election, I think the overwhelming instinct of people will be not to protest against the Liberal Party, because under Dutton the Liberal Party has been performing pretty well. I think the instinct will be to protest against a really poor Labor government. And if you want to send a strong message to a really poor Labor government, you don't do that by voting Teal. And I think the question that every Teal has got to answer is, in the event of a hung parliament, who would you support? If they refuse to say, I think we know that they're going to support Labor. And if they do come out and say they're going to support Labor, well, plainly, that's not going to be very satisfactory in electorates which have historically been strongly Liberal. So I think that the Teal threat is overrated. What I think the coalition will do is that on energy, on immigration, on housing, on general management of the economy, they will pitch themselves as a clear and strong alternative to Labor. And under the circumstances that we find ourselves in, I think that will be an attractive message in the teal seats as well as in the aspirational seats of outer metropolitan Sydney and Melbourne.
How do you think it would play out if the Teals said we might back Dutton in the event? How would that sort of... How do you reckon that'd go?
Well, I think the next question is, why didn't you back the coalition at all in the last parliament?
Yeah.
I think it exposes the fact that these Teals are pretty hypocritical and largely masquerading under false pretences.
Yeah. Let's talk about Trump. You mentioned a little bit about Trump at the start, how he's galvanised the centre-right. It is quite interesting how he won decently, but not by a landslide. But everything feels a bit different now. You see a lot of the tech, oligarchs and big business and so forth, those who were attacking Trump, including those in the media. We've seen Facebook saying they did the wrong thing with this fake fact-checking and censorship and so forth. It feels like a lot has changed in a very short space of time. He's come out of the gates very quick on Paris Climate Agreement, on rescinding the woke ideology and diversity, equity, inclusion, declaring an emergency at the southern border, and also on energy. And he's wasting no time. I think we're going to be living in a period of rapid change and transformation. So just interested, I guess, in your assessment of, we've only had one day of the Trump presidency, but how are things shaping up from your vantage point?
Well, I suppose the first point to make is that Trump may not be the president you like, but I think he definitely is the president the world needs right now. America and the wider Anglosphere needed a disruptor, and that's what Trump is. He's a disruptor. And plainly, he's used the 4 years that he's had out of office as a time to reflect and prepare. When he went in 2016, A, he was a political novice, and B, it was regarded as a bit of a fluke result. This time, sure, it was a relatively narrow win, but it was a win in the Electoral College, in the popular vote, in the Senate, and in the House of Representatives. And it was a win despite everything that his opponents had thrown at him, including these largely trumped up court cases, this lawfare against him, so the weaponisation of justice against him. So it was decisive in the sense that the public knew exactly what they were voting for this time in a way they didn't necessarily the first time round, and it was under the circumstances a very clear result. And since the result, we've had a lot of pretty sensible announcements about appointments, and we've had a lot of, I think, very clear, at least at an aspirational level, policy directions. Now, the blizzard, not so much a flurry as a blizzard of executive orders that we've seen in the first 24 to 48 hours of the new presidency will inevitably have to run the gauntlet of the courts and legislation, and I fear there'll be a bit of pushback. But it has been a bit of a shock and awe start.
Yep.
And even as president-elect, he seemed to be changing the world, or at least changing the mood of the world, changing the responses of some of America's foes and competitors. So I'm, as I said, I'm pretty optimistic. I think there are a lot of lessons here for Australia, particularly when it comes to energy, particularly when it comes to defence, and particularly when it comes to diversifying our trade away from communist China. So there will be some difficult adjustments, but I think all of those adjustments will be much easier if there is a change of government, so that we've got here in Canberra a change of government which is largely like-minded and considerably sympathetic to what Washington is trying to do.
There's a question I have to ask you, which is Greenland, and you mentioned defence and national security. What do you think of his gambit to take or have greater influence over Greenland? And we know that he has a lot of showmanship, saying he's going to take it over a bite or whatever, which I don't think is going to happen. But is there legitimacy to his point from a national security perspective about bringing Greenland more within the orbit of the United States?
Well, I don't claim to have studied the Greenland issue particularly closely, but my recollection is that the United States already has very significant military installations in Greenland as a result of decades of strategic cooperation with Denmark through NATO. I have no reason to think that that couldn't be extended, and if there are strategic mineral resources that need to be unlocked, again, I have no reason to think that couldn't happen. I haven't read The Art of the Deal, but I'm told by people who have studied it and Trump's style more closely that he does tend to make ambit claims in order to get something significant that he really wants. And I suspect that the claims against the Panama Canal and over Greenland are, if you like, Trump negotiating bluster. But if in the end we do get better use of whatever facilities Greenland can offer and more effective utilisation of things like the Panama Canal, well, that's no bad thing. Again, sometimes you've got to, I suppose, knock down the door to get the people inside the house to take you seriously. Now, that doesn't mean that it's a home invasion, but it does mean that you need to be taken seriously.
Well, let's go back domestically and anti-Semitism, which continues, and the firebombing of a childcare facility in Sydney recently, and this is just yet another attack. It seems to be daily or weekly. There's something happening on the streets of our cities or on university campuses. It seems to have just gotten worse, and I think a part of that is the permission structure that was given not just federally, but by many in the community who basically turned a blind eye and were excusing some of this behaviour, and it's escalated. Where do you think this issue now stands, and what do you think the government needs to do to try and stamp this out as best they can?
Dan, I think this wave of anti-Semitic violence, even domestic terrorism, it's utterly un-Australian, and it does need to be ruthlessly stamped out. There have been something like 13 significant anti-Semitic instances in New South Wales alone over just the last 16 days. So it is a serious problem. It is getting worse. I don't know how credible these reports are that foreign actors are paying local criminals to do some of these things. But that does inject, I suppose, a note of interference with our sovereignty into this whole issue. Now, basically, it's been mishandled by officialdom from day one. That disgraceful protest on the 9th of October, the images of which beamed around the world of crowds screaming "F the Jews" and "Gas the Jews" before the Sydney Opera House, that should never have been allowed to take place. The police should have broken that up. Let's face it, the Opera House was lit up with the Israeli flag in solidarity with the suffering people of Israel and in solidarity with Jewish people everywhere. Plainly, this protest was at odds with that. It shouldn't have been allowed to go ahead, and it should have been broken up when it did. If our authorities are capable of acting ruthlessly to crush freedom protests at the time of the pandemic, they should have been capable of the same vigour to crush this particular protest. Likewise, the succession of ostensibly pro-Palestine, but in fact pro-Hamas and anti-Semitic protests that have disfigured our cities almost on a weekly basis since then, they should not have been allowed. The illegal encampments should have been cleared. The hate preachers in various mosques should have been silenced. The anti-Semitic protesters here on visas should have been deported. None of this has happened. Now, to the credit of Chris Minns, it now seems that New South Wales Police are making serious arrests in response to this wave of anti-Semitic domestic terrorism. But it's very late in the day, and at all times the Prime Minister has been at best playing catch-up, but more likely he's essentially been disinterested in this whole issue. He's treated hate protests as an exercise in free speech almost. He's treated what has become domestic terrorism as almost like a bit of local vandalism. He has not grasped just how serious a challenge this is. It's not simple lawlessness, it's political violence. And that's what he's failed to grasp, partly because of, I fear, the political calculus at work in some Western Sydney and outer metropolitan Melbourne seats, and partly because too many people inside the Labor Party have been tainted with this cultural Marxist view that Israel is some kind of a manifestation of settler colonialism, and therefore what happens to the Israelis in a sense is something they had coming to them anyway. And this is just dead wrong. Dead wrong. As Bob Hawke said all those years ago, if the bell tolls for Israel, it doesn't just toll for Israel, it tolls for all mankind. And if liberal democracy is damaged in Israel, the only liberal democracy in the Middle East, it's diminished everywhere. And I think it's high time that every Australian felt democratic solidarity with Israel as opposed to a misplaced religious solidarity with people in what they call Palestine.
I take your point about Chris Minns. He's certainly one of the more sensible state premiers. One of the things I'm concerned about, though, is he's pushed for more so-called anti-hate speech laws, which I don't agree with because, firstly, they don't work. We've never had more anti-hate speech laws on the books, and we've never had more anti-Semitism. And secondly, these kind of laws often don't get deployed against those that you may intend them to get deployed against, but are used in a whole range of ways that often end up silencing other people, not those whom you want to silence originally. So I think they're going down the wrong path if they think this is going to be resolved through anti-hate speech laws. At best, it will suppress the speech. But the problem we have, isn't it, that these people believe this stuff. Like we have people in our country, not just visa holders, but citizens, some of whom were born here, who not just say it, but they believe it to their bones. And I think we need to have a much bigger debate with the community about we've got a real problem with our migration system, and we've got a real problem if we have people in our country that actually believe it, and it's not going to be solved through a press release.
Well, you're right, Dan, and likewise, I don't think the answer to this problem is stronger laws against hate speech. I think the answer to this problem is more vigorous policing. And again, that comes from the top. It comes from the premiers, it comes from the Prime Minister, it comes from the police commissioners. People who are breaching the peace, who are oppressing their fellow Australians, they simply have to be restrained. I mean, imagine if the protesters on October the 9th in the Opera House forecourt were saying what they said about Jews and Israelis against Aboriginal people. Do we think for a second the police wouldn't have moved in with great vigour and broken it up? Well, frankly, hate speech is hate speech, and it needs to be treated as that by the police. So I'm with you there, Dan. I don't think more hate speech laws are the answer. We've got enough of them already. I think the answer is more vigorous policing. And your point about importing some of the world's problems, again, it's well made. And this is where one of the things that I think an incoming coalition government needs to look at is a more rigorous citizenship test. There were reports recently that even our existing pretty tokenistic citizenship test has been failed by something like 1/3 of the people who sit it. Now, I mean, I invite listeners to go online and look at the sample citizenship test, which is available there on the department's website. And there are 5 questions on Australian values. They're not exactly difficult questions. There is the citizenship oath that every new citizen is supposed to take and mean about Australia, whose democratic beliefs I share, whose laws I will uphold and obey. Plainly, there are plenty of people in this country who have taken a citizenship oath, either not meaning it, not understanding it, or with an intention to flout it. Because we have got too many people in our country at the moment who need to remember just whose side they are now required to be on. Australia's side, not Gaza's side, not the Palestinian Authority's side. In the end, not even Britain's side or America's side, Australia's side. It just so happens that 99 times out of 100, we're on the same side as our great strategic partners.
Is that grounds, do you reckon, to strip somebody's citizenship? When if somebody who's done this firebombing, let's say, and they're a citizen, now I accept if you're a natural born citizen, well, you can't render someone stateless, so I get that. But if you're a naturalised citizen, you've taken the oath of citizenship, clearly you've not meant it, you've engaged in this behaviour. I would have thought that's pretty clear that we're stripping you of your citizenship. Thank you very much.
Well, back in the days of the Abbott government, we certainly did propose to strip dual citizens of their Australian citizenship if they were a national security risk. And I think it would be perfectly reasonable to say to people who have an alternative citizenship, whose actions suggest that they don't take their Australian citizenship very seriously, yes, we will require you to relinquish your Australian citizenship. But again, I think that the main thing is to be much more mindful of the fact that an immigrant society like ours needs to be very, very insistent that when people come to this country from elsewhere, wherever that elsewhere might be, they are not living in Hotel Australia, they are joining Team Australia. And that means putting Australia first. It means adopting Australian values. It means leaving ethnic hatreds in your original homeland. It means solidarity with your fellow Australians, whatever their religion. It doesn't mean solidarity with some global ummah.
Well, I think on that note, Tony, we'll leave it there. So thank you for your time again. It's great to kick off 2025, and I think it's going to be a very big year, not only with Trump, but also with our election here. So looking forward to our chats over the coming weeks.
And Dan, if I just might add, and this is where I really think it's important that we get strong leadership from the Australian Muslim community. Now, there are lots and lots of decent Australians who happen to be Muslim. There are lots of serious Muslims who are totally committed to Australia. I'll be doing a citizenship ceremony with one such in a couple of days' time at Liverpool, the Mayor Ned Manoon. But we really do need stronger leadership from the Australian Muslim community's leaders saying, look, our commitment has got to be to Australia first. Sure, we're good Muslims, but we are good Australians first and foremost. I mean, that's what was expected of Catholics back in the old days. That's what my own co-religionists have been able to pledge to our country all the way through, and may it be true of all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Tony, again, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Dan.
This is a production of the Centre for the Australian Way of Life at the Institute of Public Affairs. To find out more, visit australia.ipa.org.au.